I am Joella Mahoney, and we are here at the Museum of Northern Arizona in Flagstaff, Arizona. This is the site of my exhibition, Passionate Vision, 5 Decades on the Colorado Plateau. And it's especially interesting and important to me that this exhibition is here at the museum, because when I came in 1951 to be an art major at this little tiny college here then, Arizona State College, now it's called NAU, when I came, I knew nothing about the Colorado Plateau. I came from the Bay Area in California. And my art professor, John R. Salter, said to me, "You don't know anything about the Southwest, so you go to that museum and they will teach you." And that museum is this museum, founded here by the Coltons, Dr. Harold Colton and Mary Russell Farrell Colton. He a scientist, she an artist. This building was built in 1932 and ever since has been the museum in all of northern Arizona, where people can learn about the Colorado Plateau, the arts, the cultures, the people, and the geology and the landscape. This was taken in 1958 when I had my first purchase of a Navajo rug. And here, I'm hiking in the Grand Canyon in the 60s with my son, and here in the 90s, in a side canyon on a river trip in the Grand Canyon, all my paintings are based on somewhere where I have backpacked or hiked. The drawing of the skull is the oldest work here in the show. It's from 1951. My very first semester here at this college in Flagstaff as an art student, my professor made this setup and I carefully rendered it. And interestingly enough, years later, when I looked at a book with Georgia O'Keeffe drawings in it, there was this exact same setup. But no one ever told me there was an artist named Georgia O'Keeffe. I didn't learn that till years later. Now, and the horse ink sketch below it, that is 1954, and it shows a contrast between a carefully drawn charcoal rendering and a more expressive way of painting, no drawing ahead of time. And even when I was a child, I could draw realistically and also very expressively. There are no oil paintings from the 50s in this show because the collectors felt reluctant to loan them, and they are quite fragile now. But what I do have here are 2 drawings from 1963 and 64 from graduate school, and they illustrate the influence of abstract expressionism. So that, well, there's what, 10, 15-year gap in between these drawings, but from my memory of hiking in the back canyons, these 2 drawings are about rocks choking waterfalls. And I have just pushed the Conte crayon with a medium and softened up the hard edges and the realism of them, so that I went beyond picture making. There is a difference between picture making and painting. Not one better than the other, not right or wrong, good or bad. But I've always been interested in the expressive. And so these early drawings from the 60s are moving in that realm. The painting on the right is called Dry Lake, and it's from 1965. The origin of the idea for this white center and the idea of the dry lake originated when I was 9 years old, and we were driving from Chicago across the Nevada desert to the Bay Area in California. And I remember staring out of the car window at the dry lakes that were 30, 40, 50 miles in the distance. And that white slice was very intriguing to me. I had the feeling that I wanted to get out of the car and hike all the way over there to see what is that mystery. And so even as a child, all of us have responses to nature and to experiences that come back to us much later. So the dry lake came into this painting in 1965, and the whole idea of that white ellipse or white middle ground has carried through a lot of my work. In this painting, Dry Lake, you clearly see the influence of abstract expressionism. I have always loved abstract expressionism. It's a wonderful counter to my drawing ability too, to get away from the imitative and the recording to the expressive. The multiple horizon in Dry Lake, which expresses to me the possibility of endless opportunity. The space of the West often expresses that to a lot of people, where we can be free and grow and expand. Actually, to me, it means personal freedom in the inside, not necessarily on the outside. But that concept now has morphed a year later into white shapes that look like pods or cowrie shells, and even a searching figure reaching up. So the whole idea of the figure in the landscape starts evolving too, out of this whiteness, this shape that I saw when I was 9 years old. The Lake Powell series started in 1979. A woman called me up and wanted a commission, a painting for her fireplace. So I went to her house and we measured, and she decided she wanted a 5-foot by 3-foot painting. And I said, fine. And then I said, what do you want on it? And she said, just rocks and water. Oh, okay. So I went home and I painted the Lake Powell afternoon painting on my left. And when I brought it to her, she met me at the door and she said, I can't pay you right now. I've had an emergency, so what should we do? And usually I just give the painting to the collector and they always pay. I'm never worried about that. But I had gotten into something in Lake Powell afternoon that I myself was intrigued about. It wasn't just a commission. Now, I love doing commissions because they get me into territory that I might not otherwise explore. So I really had never done a large oil of Lake Powell, even though I've done small ones and drawings and whatnot. Well, anyway, I took the painting home and kept it and painted her another one, but it is the mother of the big Lake Powell series. And Lake Powell 3, Past, Present, and Future, on my right, is a painting that came a year later in 1980. It's 8 feet by 4 feet. And there's even a larger one, 8 feet by 5 feet, in the permanent collection at the University of Verne in the library. Well, the Lake Powell series is about the long view of landscape and of life. And it's like, imagine you're a hawk flying over a landscape and seeing everything below, all in one piece. And I remember after I painted the Lake Powell 3 on my right, I said to a colleague of mine, I painted the definitive painting of my life now. It's only 1980, now what do I do? And She was an art historian and an environmentalist, and she said, "What did Lake Powell cover up?" And then I knew my next series, because art is always political. It always has messages far beyond just the picture of something. And so what Lake Powell covered up is one of the most beautiful canyons on the whole planet, Glen Canyon. Now there's not much water in Lake Powell, so many things have been revealed, but the next series is the Cleft series, what Lake Powell covered up. So when my colleague, my art historian colleague, Professor Mickey Brott, said to me, "What did Lake Powell cover up?" I said, aha, that's one of the great things about feedback. I love feedback because I always get new ideas. And so what Lake Powell covered up were these magnificent sandstone walls in Glen Canyon. And the water in the 70s and 80s was 3/4 of the way up these walls, so everything below was hidden. So these paintings, this series, the Cleft series, is metaphor for what has been hidden or destroyed by the 19th and 20th century Industrial Revolution, the mechanistic scientific overlay. Now, we've all benefited, of course, from the car culture, but we've also done great damage to the planet because of that. Anyway, you might not necessarily know that I had a political agenda in mind with these paintings. I think it's important for the artist to speak up so that the viewer has some idea about what the artist is thinking about, just as I like to hear from you, the viewer, about your response to my work. So after I painted a series of Cleft paintings, the beautiful canyon walls, then I asked myself the question, what's way deep into the canyon at the bottom of those walls? And what's down there is the inner canyon. So the next series that came is the inner canyon. Now these are all paintings out of the 80s. The Lake Powell series started in 1979, and then the Lake Powell, the Cleft series, and these inner canyons take up the 80s, my major focus, those three major series. It's interesting to note that in 1979, when a woman called me up for a commission, I had no idea that that commission would predict three of my most major series. The inner canyon is metaphor for the inner. It's a place of contemplation. In Canyon Reflections, the painting on my right, we could sit on that rock there and stare into the reflective surface of the water. As old as consciousness is, the reflective surface to the human being means the realm of the ideal. That means it's pure illusion, and all art is illusion. All of the arts, illusion created by the mind. In fact, all art is an abstraction. Even the painting of the wolf with every piece of fur on its nose, that's an abstraction. All art is abstract. Abstracted out of the outer life and the inner life. It's all idea, all emotion, all aesthetics out of our brain. So the inner canyon, a place of reflection, a place to go inner, where the light is in the inner, so that the light on the water is really the light from the outer world. Now also, in the inner canyon paintings, I always leave a way out, so that after we've been sitting on the rock a while there, contemplating what is meaningful to us, we have to jump into life and sink or swim and go out into the light of the afternoon way in the back of the canyon and resume our life on the outside too. So we live fully inwardly and outwardly. And those two worlds are blended in art. We saw the oldest drawing in the show, 1951. Well, this is one of the two newest paintings. This is 2005, and this is called Pour Over. And last year in the Colorado Plateau area, we had a very wet year. So all the canyons I hiked were running with water. All the pour-overs were so beautiful and lush and racing along that the impact of so much water was so interesting to me. And this painting is still the Inner Canyon from the 80s, the series of the 80s that we just looked at. But the Inner Canyon here has been condensed and highly designed. The light of the Inner Canyon is still there, the golden light of the sunlight on the Inner Canyon, and then the dark protecting walls. But the overwhelming amount of water, it focuses on the strength of water, the strength of flood, and also the necessity of water on the Colorado, the life of the Colorado Plateau. We all absolutely have to have water. In fact, all life on the planet is dependent upon water for its existence. So this painting is about that, the overwhelmingness of the power of water and the meaning for life. Still the Inner Canyon, a place of introspection and reflection. These two paintings are from the Rush to Meaning series, and that's still using the landscape motif of the Colorado Plateau, but pushing it more toward pure design. The painting on my left is called Slant Light, and that still is the Inner Canyon motif. It's a painting from 1996, and I did that after the 35-mile backpack down the Paria Canyon. We hiked from the campground that's about 30 miles west of Lake Powell, and then you come out down at Lee's Ferry. And in that canyon, there's everything I ever wanted to see on a canyon wall. And in many ways, it's as close as we can get to the experience of hiking down Glen Canyon. Slant Light, the painting on my left, is a picture of water. Now go up, almost, well, at least 2/3 all the way up the painting from the bottom, and all that is water that we walk through. The upper part of the painting, it's very obvious that those are canyon walls and that we could walk through the Inner Canyon there. But in the morning, when you walk through that knee-deep water or ankle-deep water, the light comes through on diagonals from great rifts in the canyon wall, and it bounces off opposite walls, and then the light bounces back, and you get all this reflection from various sources in the water. In fact, the slice of pale blue right in the middle of that watery area is a slice of sky that's way high above our heads because the walls of the canyon are so high. So that the water, now it's still a reflective surface, but it's pure design a design in its own right. Our nervous system can respond to pictures of things as well as patterns of things. In fact, pattern, dark and light pattern, is how we negotiate our way through the world, because otherwise we'd bump into things. When it's dark out at night and there are no lights, it's easy to fall off the sidewalk. Or when skiing, you're in a whiteout, it's all white, you fall off the edge of the mountain. But so we need pattern to understand what it is we're doing in our visual life. So this pushes all that subject matter more toward pure design. And when I paint this way, and actually when I paint in a more realistic way, I always paint in all directions on the canvas so that I can solve the structure of the painting. Structure is really important. Now my painting on the right is called Rush to Meaning. This painting I painted in 2 afternoons after a 2-month study that I did of the area here called Slide Rock. And when I paint something that quickly in 2 afternoons, I know I'm onto a new series. And I called it Rush to Meaning because immediately after I had finished it, a painting buddy of mine came into my studio, ran up to the painting and said, Slide Rock, because he'd been with me while we were painting at Slide Rock on site. And that's why I said Rush to Meaning as a title. And that painting was painted in 1986. This one on the left painted in 1996. There's enough energy in Rush to Meaning to last me the rest of my life as far as ideas about paintings are concerned. But that's what that painting is about. It was stimulated by an actual place in nature, but it's about the energy of life, a passion for life. One critic said the passions of the heart. So it's loaded with all that life energy. This is the mother of the Rush to Meaning series. And it came about because in 1986, the previous year, I had done a commission for the state of Arizona to honor Oracle State Park. That's outside of Tucson, near Oracle. And at that time, it was Arizona's newest state park. So I did all that and completed that. And so the following year, Bruce Babbitt, almost single-handedly, when he was governor, saved Slide Rock in Oak Creek Canyon. It was being totally trashed, and so Bruce and the state of Arizona bought that property and protected it, and it's now Slide Rock State Park. So on my own, I wanted to honor Slide Rock. So I went out to Slide Rock one day and painted 2 full sheet watercolors, very realistically, of Slide Rock. And I left out all the people, I just wanted the landscape. And then I came into the studio and picked up this canvas, 5 feet by 4 feet, and started a painting of Slide Rock. I did not refer to my watercolors. Well, the painting was way too realistic. I didn't want that. I did not want yet another cliche picture of Slide Rock. I wanted to express the strength and beauty of that place and how unusual it is. So for 2 months, I hammered away at this painting and finally finished it. I was so relieved to have finally made what I consider to be a powerful, definitive statement of Slide Rock. So relieved to have completed it, that I immediately, the very afternoon I finished this one, picked up the nearest canvas I had handy. And that's Rush to Meaning, and I've already talked about Rush to Meaning. And that's what I mean by I did all this prep work, and then it prepared me to go into a whole new series, just like that. But it took 2 months of preparation and all my years of painting to do that. So the Rush to Meaning series is a very long, ongoing series. This is 2005, and I'm still using the energy of it. But this is 1986, Slide Rock. This is one of the most popular paintings I've ever done, with people who know nothing about art and with people who know a lot about art. And it's very interesting when a painting can communicate like that, as broadly as that. This is the other painting in the show from 2005, so this is a very recent painting. And here, the influence of the Rush to Meaning series is very obvious to me. Also, this is the Monsoon Sky series. So even though it still has the energy of Rush to Meaning in it, the Monsoon Sky dominates this painting, and so it is out of that series. The skies during monsoon season here in the Southwest are just as fantastic and vast as is the landscape. So they really are skyscapes of endless space. And they also carry the same message of endless possibility, like the ongoing landscape, forever, 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 the one horizon after another, that started way back in 1965 with Dry Lake. The sky does that too. So this whole idea, the concept of endless possibilities, personal freedom, not at anybody's expense, the vastness that life can hold for us, and those concepts draw many of us to the West. In 1965, when I did the Dry Lake painting, and that white center section came into my work, a critic asked me, well, what did that all mean? And I wasn't too sure. I knew it somehow had to do with being alive and personal freedom and whatnot, but I wasn't too sure exactly what it meant. Well, that was 1965. On my left is a painting called Heaven on Earth, and I painted that in 1973. And after I painted that painting, years after, in fact, I finally understood the white shape. Now, the white shape goes through a great deal of my work. It's in the Rush to Meaning series, it's even in the Monsoon Sky series. But here in 1973, I just painted this painting. And a few months after I painted it, it was taken away from me because it was selected to travel around the world in embassies in the State Department's Art in the Embassies program. So I didn't get to see this painting again until 8 or 9 years later. And then when I unwrapped it, I understood about the white shape. Now, I write stories about my paintings, but after I paint them. First of all, I just paint them. And I trust that process, that out of my unconscious, the best work comes. Well, when I got this painting back and I unwrapped it, I was visiting with a friend at the time, my art historian friend. She was standing there. And as I unwrapped it, I looked at it and I saw that it divided up into 3 spaces: top, middle, bottom. And like those of us from European heritage, 60,000, 30,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, we divided up the experience of life into 3 realms: heaven, earth, and the underworld. So I pointed at the top of the painting and I said, oh, look, that looks like moonlight on the mesas, heaven on earth to me. And then I got the idea of the title for the painting, Heaven on Earth. And then the earth plane is the white part in between. And I'd been living in Laguna Beach at the time, and it reminded me of the energy when waves break on rocks. And so I thought, well, on the life plane, it's all about energy, the energy of consciousness, and the growth toward becoming conscious while we're here and living responsibly. But in order to do that, we need enough richness in our background, and then so the color, the reds and the greens, the rich colors at the bottom of the painting, the underworld, the underpinnings, our background. We have to have enough parenting, enough teaching, enough shelter, enough food. We don't need excess, but we need enough to self-actualize on the white plane. So the white plane, when I was 9 years old, it meant going toward some goal of personal freedom. Now, in 1973, it meant living here and becoming as conscious as possible. Now, I don't belong to any religious dogma or anything. I was not raised in religion at all. I was raised with the idea of nature as divinity. But my years of teaching at the university level, I realized that the students I got that came out of the ghettos, the kids that were on full scholarships, they needed enough to flourish. And if they didn't get it, they might not make it. So this is a painting that 9 years after I painted, I realized it was a painting about the integration of being alive. So it's about landscape, but it's also about being alive on that landscape too. So another major function of art is to teach us about what's inside of us too. And when we see it in a work of art, we get ideas about what's inside of us. So my story about my painting doesn't have to be your story. In fact, I'd like to hear your story about that painting. Now, this is another painting that is one of the most popular ones I've ever painted. Now, the painting on my right is called Cliff People, and it's a painting about the theme of untimely death. All art is autobiographical. Even if an artist says it isn't, it always is autobiographical because it's about the person who did it. And that's why we can look at each other's paintings, writings, dances, music, whatnot, and share with each other about how life is to us. But again, this is a painting about integration. It's about loss, but also about the healing of loss by the beauty of the landscape. And beauty can be healing because it brings up feelings. And color also brings up feelings. So we're all drawn to beautiful landscape, beautiful jewelry, beautiful animals, people, because it reassures us that we can be whole. Beauty reassures us that actually for maybe a moment, everything is whole, everything is in order. And beauty in our life is very, very it's a necessity. And it does vary with different cultures and with different people. But the whole idea of art as having an integrating function to the person who makes it and the person who views it is a very important function. Now, art is not therapy, but art is, of course, communication, a way where we can bind ourselves with other people, with ourselves, and with our environment. All my paintings, my large studio paintings of landscapes, are based on places where I have backpacked or hiked. Often when I go hiking, and of course backpacking, I take my watercolors with me, or my oil pastels, and sometimes my oil paints, and I paint small, realistic works right on the site. These I paint realistically because this is how I learn the nuts and bolts about my subject matter. I learn about the structure of the land, the colors, the shapes, the dark and light patterns, the textures. So these small paintings I call my homework paintings, because when I come back into the studio, I do not refer to the small work. The large paintings I paint directly out of my experience, but I have learned about the landscape from doing these realistic works. I never use photography. Photography is an art in its own right. I never work from photographs. So these small paintings are what I call my studies.